The evening always came softly in that corner of the west, as if the sky itself were a tired traveler lowering its heavy head and resting it upon the rim of the distant mountains. You could stand on the open plain, feel the hush fall over everything, hear the whisper of tall grass brushing one blade against another, like old friends greeting in the twilight. Color lingered in the heavens long after the sun dipped, amber melting into rose, rose sinking into violet, violet surrendering to a slow spreading blue that felt as deep and endless as sorrow itself. And in the hollow of that quiet land stood a ranch so humble and worn, it seemed stitched into the soil, rather than built upon it. The boards were weathered by seasons of sun and storm, faded to the color of river-polished driftwood. A single lantern hung by the door, its glass clouded, its glow a small, trembling heart trying its best to keep the dark at bay. This was the home of Eli Thorne, a man whose presence was as steady as the old earth, and just as silent. He rose with the dawn, worked through the long heat, rested only when the moon forced him to, and never spoke of the heaviness in his chest, the kind that doesn't kill a man, just erodes him little by little, like water carving its patient way through stone. Eli was not poor because he lacked skill, nor because he lacked will. He was poor in the way honest men often are, when the world turns a little too fast, and fortune keeps its back turned to those who never learned how to chase it. But he carried no bitterness, only a quiet sort of acceptance, like someone who has made peace with life, even when life has offered nothing but calloused hands and empty pockets. The town knew him, but did not see him, the way people fail to see a tree that has always been there, until the day it falls. His eyes held the gentleness of someone who understood animals better than men, and who found comfort not in noise, but in the slow rhythm of hooves, in the warm breath of a horse, leaning trustingly against his shoulder. He was the sort of man who fixed things quietly, without needing thanks, the sort whose footsteps did not demand notice, but whose presence made a place feel safer, even if no one could explain why. Far different was Cyrus Beckett, the richest man for 3 counties in any direction. You heard him before you saw him, heard the thunder of his horses, the jangle of his spurs, the booming echo of a laugh that shook the saloon's dusty windows. Before it ever reached your ears, wealth rested on Cyrus like a heavy coat, one he wore proudly, never letting anyone forget the shimmer of it. He owned the Beckett mine, the Beckett Bank, the half-finished railway line, and so many acres of land that his property markers became the morning route for jackrabbits. He carried stories about himself, as if they were gospel, one tale bigger than the last, and the townfolk repeated them, mostly because he made them feel small, and partly because those who stand tallest often shape the way a community thinks. Cyrus had a voice that filled a room, a stride that expected the world to step back, and a smile sharpened to the point of a knife. There was charm in him, yes, but it was charm born from power, not tenderness, from confidence, not compassion. And yet, behind him in the bank, working with quiet diligence, soft hands dusted in chalk, ink staining the edges of her sleeves, was Mara Ellery. Mara did not speak loudly, nor walk with the sharp strides of a woman demanding attention. She moved like a page turning, soft, steady, purposeful, eyes gentle yet guarded, as though each memory behind them had its own scar. Most of the town thought her delicate, a pretty ornament in Beckett's great vault of wealth, someone to be admired from afar, but never understood. But Mara knew more numbers than Cyrus himself, knew the truth behind every ledger, every shipment, every secret. She carried both grace and grit, though the world only saw the former, and rarely guessed the latter. Sometimes, when Eli stepped into the bank to deliver a letter, or to ask after a payment that never quite came, Mara would glance up, and there would be a small, almost shy kindness in her eyes, the sort of look people give when they recognize something familiar, a reflection of their own quiet loneliness. He would nod to her, short, awkward, but genuine, and she would return the gesture. A silent greeting shared between two souls, who found in each other a moment of ease, even if neither dare name it. It was not attraction. Not yet. It was gentleness meeting gentleness, like wind brushing across still water. And though neither knew it, their fates had already begun to circle around each other, like two slow-moving stars, drawn closer, without realizing the pull. Cyrus treated Mara like a prized possession, a polished cog in his golden machine. He admired the precision of her mind, but not the depth of her heart, saw her efficiency, but not her exhaustion. He had never learned to look beneath the surface of anything, and he did not know how. One dusty afternoon, with the sun hanging heavy like an anvil, the three found themselves in the same room. Cyrus counting new gold bars from a recent shipment, Mara tallying ledger sheets, and Eli quietly waiting at the counter, hat in hand, dust on his boots. Cyrus glanced up, his grin wide, sharp, too bright for the dim room. He clapped a hand on the iron safe beside him, a behemoth of black steel, its lock polished to a mirror sheen. Open the safe and the gold is yours. He joked, loud enough for the clerks in the back to hear. A roaring wave of laughter rolled through the bank. Eli's shoulders stiffened, just a breath, barely noticeable, his eyes lowering like a man swallowing a stone. And Mara, sitting behind her desk, felt something in her chest tighten, a small pain, because cruelty so often hid itself behind humor, and only those wounded by it recognized its sting. Cyrus meant nothing by it, so he believed. The joke was for amusement, not cruelty, but the room felt suddenly colder, and the gold bars gleamed too bright, like they were mocking the man who had none. Eli did not answer. He nodded once, a movement so restrained, so humble, it felt like a bow. Then he turned and walked out, quietly, as he had entered. The laughter faded, leaving only the echo of Cyrus's pride and Mara's silent disapproval, which she hid beneath a calm face, though her hands trembled faintly against the ledger book. When dusk folded over the town, Mara stepped outside, the day's numbers still running in her thoughts, but her mind lingering on the moment in the bank. The wind brushed her hair, gentle as a mother's hand, and she felt the weight of something unspoken, something shifting quietly beneath the surface of her life. Behind her, the lamps in the bank windows flickered, casting shadowy bars of light across the street, like the lines of cage. Ahead of her, the horizon stretched wide and endless, the air smelling of dust, cedar, and freedom she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. And somewhere out on the plain, Eli guided his tired horse home, the same quiet ache in his chest, the same humble dignity in his steps, but with a new heaviness settling into his bones. The narrator's voice softens here, like embers settling deeper into the fire, because stories rarely turn on moments of grand action. They turn on quiet things, on glances, on almost spoken words, on wounds so small they hide beneath the skin, until the world presses them too hard. What happened in that bank? That single careless joke would unravel truths neither Cyrus, nor Eli, nor Mara were ready to face. But the winds of the West carried the promise. That dignity, courage, and the kind of love that grows slowly, quietly, like a seed buried deep in dry earth, would soon find their way into the open. And the safe, that iron heart of Cyrus Beckett's empire, would not stay closed forever, not when fate itself had already placed its hand upon the lock. Morning in the West always rose quietly, as if the sun were reluctant to disturb those still dreaming. Light slipped soft as silk across the plains, turning the faded grasses silver, and brushing the rooftops with a touch almost tender. Inside her small boarding room above the apothecary, Mara Ellery woke to the muted sounds of the town beginning its day. The creak of wagon wheels, the distant whinny of horses, the soft murmur of women sweeping their porches. All of it blended into a gentle music, the kind that made her feel less alone, even if she still carried a solitude that clung to her like a second skin. She rose with unhurried grace, braided her hair loosely, and washed her face in cool water, watching droplets trail down her cheeks, as though they carried away memories she wished she could forget. Working at the bank meant precision, meant numbers balanced perfectly, meant orders she could trust, in a world that had once been too chaotic, too unkind. Her past lived in shadows she rarely spoke of, but the remnants of it shaped every careful step she took. When she walked into the bank that morning, the air was already thick with dust and the faint smell of ink. Cyrus Beckett stood near the counter, polishing the handle of his prized safe, as though the gleam of it ensured his importance. He greeted her with a smile too broad, too practiced, a smile that felt like a performance for an unseen audience. She returned the greeting with polite restraint, the sort that protected her heart from men who confused ownership with affection. Cyrus fancied himself charming, but charm without gentleness was nothing more than arrogance wearing perfume. As she settled behind her desk, her fingers traced the edges of a ledger, yet her thoughts drifted, not to numbers, but to Eli Thorne, to the quiet way he had endured Cyrus's joke the day before, to the way humiliation had flickered in his eyes, before he swallowed it with that painful calm that too many good men wear when the world grows cruel. She wondered what he carried home with him, what weight settled on his shoulders. After laughter followed him out the door. Loyalty, kindness, humility. These things were not valued in the West. Yet they were the things she treasured most, because she too lived quietly, softly, often overlooked. Later that day, the drought that had been creeping through the plains began showing its claws. The well at Eli's ranch dipped to a shallow whisper. The river nearby thinned, pulling away from its own banks, as though the earth had frightened it. Cattle grew restless, stamping the dry ground, seeking water that no longer answered their thirst. Word spread through town, as it always did, carried on murmurs, tilted glances, and the careless cruelty of gossip. Poor Eli, some said, never could keep that ranch afloat. Others snickered. The man's too gentle for a place like this. The West eats softness alive. Cyrus's voice stood above them all, booming through the saloon like a drumbeat. He retold the story of the safe, the gold, the joke, adding details each time, making himself the hero of a tale he had twisted for his own pride. Mara heard fragments of it as she walked home. Her steps slowed, a troubled weight settling into her chest. It is a strange thing, how a single moment can echo so loudly when it strikes the heart of someone undeserving. That evening, the wind moved lazily through the town, carrying the fading heat of the day with it. Mara found herself outside the small supply shop, searching for ink, but finding instead a familiar presence nearby. Eli was there, quietly loading sacks of feed onto his wagon. His movements were slow, careful, his posture carrying exhaustion. And yet, in the way he handled each sack, there was a kind of grace, a quiet determination that made her breath catch. She approached with steps soft as dusk, and he glanced up, surprised but not startled. His eyes were tired, but warm, the color of worn leather, weathered but true. They spoke of ordinary things first, of the drought, of the stubbornness of cattle, of the way the wind had changed direction lately. But beneath those words ran an unspoken thread, a gentle knowing between them. That kindness was not lost, even in a world that often forgot its worth. Before parting, Mara offered him a small loaf of bread, something she had saved from the bank's midday meal. He hesitated, then accepted with a humble nod, as though the gesture meant far more than she could understand. Later that week, she found the loose step outside her boarding house suddenly repaired, the wood replaced, the nails driven evenly. No note, no explanation, just a quiet deed done by someone who expected nothing in return. Her heart recognized the signature of it. Eli Thorne, the man the town underestimated, yet the man whose dignity held more strength than Cyrus's gold ever could. The days passed slowly, and with them, the bond between Mara and Eli grew in small, delicate ways, never rushed, never named, They shared glances that lingered a moment too long. Conversations spoken like secrets traded in the hush of twilight. Little offerings of trust, steadily weaving a bridge between their hearts. But storms rarely form from thunder alone. Sometimes they are born in jealousy, in pride, in the fragile ego of a man unwilling to lose control. Cyrus began to notice. He saw the way Mara's eyes softened around Eli, saw how the rancher's presence made her posture less guarded. He saw something he could not buy, could not own, and that frightened him more than death, more than drought, more than the crumbling foundation of his empire. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Cyrus returned to town after visiting his expanding rail project. He rode in with a new swagger, a new plan, a new hunger to reassert his importance. He strode into the saloon, demanded a drink, and retold the story of Eli and the safe yet again. His voice loud, his laughter too sharp, like a man trying to impress a mirror. But this time, there was something different in him, a kind of simmering irritation beneath the bravado, a note of bitterness, the kind that grows when pride feels threatened and begins to bare its teeth. Mara heard the rumor the next morning that Cyrus had returned with a new safe, a bigger one, a more intricate lock, with gold enough inside to make the entire town gasp. The whispers grew thicker. Cyrus plans to test Eli again. Someone muttered, he wants to put the rancher in his place. Another said, it'll be a show. And Cyrus always did like an audience. Mara felt a ripple of unease, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She knew Cyrus well enough to sense when his pride had soured, and she knew Eli well enough to fear how deeply another humiliation might cut. That night, the sky hung heavy with clouds, dark and swollen, but releasing no rain. A storm waiting, hesitating, brewing quietly in the vastness above. As Mara lay in her small room, listening to the restless creak of tree branches outside, she felt a strange premonition, a whisper in her bones, that something was approaching, something heavy, something inevitable. She rose from her bed, walked to the window, and looked out over the sleepy lights of the town. Each flicker seemed fragile, like a small soul hoping to survive the wind. And somewhere beyond that quiet glow, Eli stood outside his ranch, watching the sky, feeling the same heaviness in the air, the same sense of change, like the first breath before a storm finally breaks. Neither of them knew it yet, but Cyrus Beckett had returned not with wealth, but with a challenge, a dare that would unravel truths hidden behind iron doors, and hearts that had learned too well how to hide their wounds. The narrator's voice lowers here, like a flame settling deeper into its wick, because stories do not rush toward their storms. They move slowly, with patience, with inevitability, letting every emotion take root before it blossoms into revelation. And so the West waited, holding its breath, as pride, kindness, envy, and quiet love drew closer to one another, like four horses circling the same watering hole, each step echoing against the barren earth. Soon, the joke that was never meant to matter would return, not as laughter, but as destiny. The morning Cyrus Beckett returned to town, the wind carried a strange quiet with it, a hush that seemed to slip beneath doors, curl under boots, settle in the corners where dust gathered like old memories. The sun rose pale, as though unsure it wanted to shine on what was coming. Cyrus arrived with the confidence of a man who believed the world would always bend for him. He rode a tall, chestnut stallion, its reins studded with silver, its hooves striking the earth in rhythmic pride. Behind him, two hired hands hauled a wagon draped with canvas, the shape beneath it unmistakable, square, solid, heavy as buried truth. The townsfolk gathered quickly, curiosity blooming like wildfire. Eyes watched, whispers rose, excitement mixed with the sharp scent of anticipation, because nothing stirred the West quite like the promise of spectacle, especially one orchestrated by a man who lived for the shine of his own reflection. Cyrus swung down from his horse, boots hitting the ground with a booming thud, He threw back his shoulders, looked around, and smiled the smile of a man who thought himself king. He called for attention, his voice stretching across the street. The canvas was pulled away, revealing a massive iron safe, black as midnight, polished until it gleamed like a captured storm. The lock was intricate, like an armored flower, petals of steel sealing secrets behind cold metal skin. Mara watched from the edge of the crowd, heart tightening, fingers clasped around the ledger she carried against her chest. She knew Cyrus too well. She had seen the way pride carved lines into his face, how insecurity hid beneath every boast, how fear of being made small drove him toward cruelty he disguised as entertainment. He didn't see the crowd, not truly. He saw himself in their eyes, and that reflection mattered more than any truth inside the safe. With a flourish, he clapped a hand against the iron door and declared the challenge that would echo through that town for years. Open this safe, and all the gold inside is yours. Silence rippled, shocked, confused, thrilled. This was no joke, not a passing remark tossed in arrogance. This was a spectacle, a test, a humiliation wrapped in gold paper and ribbon. Cyrus's gaze swept the crowd, searching, hunting, until it landed on the man standing toward the back. Quiet, unassuming, almost shadowed by the dusty morning light. Eli Thorne. He stood with his hands loosely at his sides, his hat pulled low, yet his posture carried a weight, a steadiness, like a river that had carved its path through years of storms. The crowd parted slightly, allowing Cyrus a clearer view, and allowing Eli the space where dignity could still stand tall. Even as laughter threatened to rise again, Cyrus spoke Eli's name, not loudly, but with a sharp edge, a blade wrapped in velvet, and every eye turned toward the rancher. Mara felt her breath catch, a soft ache blooming beneath her ribs, for she could already taste the cruelty in the air, the way pride sought to make a spectacle of humility, the way good men became targets simply for existing without armor. Eli stepped forward, not eager, not fearful, simply present, like a man who understood that some moments are not chosen. They are answered. Cyrus welcomed him with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, a grin carved from insecurity, the kind a man wears when he wants to prove he is still above those he looks down upon. The terms of the challenge spilled from his lips. Eli would have 1 hour, one tool of his choosing, and the entire town as witness. If he succeeded, he would take home the gold. If he failed, well, Cyrus didn't need to finish the sentence. Failure had a way of speaking for itself. Mara stepped closer, heart pounding softly in her chest. Her voice rose, steady, gentle, laced with a quiet courage she rarely allowed herself. She told Cyrus that cruelty was not strength, that testing a man's dignity was not sport, that wealth meant nothing if it made a man smaller, not larger. But Cyrus waved her off, calling her kindness naive, telling her Eli was harmless, no threat to anyone, least of all a man of success. Like himself, Mara's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with sorrow, the sorrow of seeing a soul shrink under the weight of its own ego. Eli stood still through it all, the wind brushing the dust from his coat, his gaze steady, calm, like a man listening to a far-off echo only he could hear. When Cyrus turned to him, waiting for him to decline, to shrink, to step back into the shadows, Eli did the one thing no one expected. He nodded. It was a simple motion, quiet as breath, but it struck the crowd like a crack of thunder across clear sky. He accepted the challenge, not for gold, not for pride, but because humiliation had worn out its welcome, and dignity needed a voice, even a soft one. The hour began. Eli stepped toward the safe, his boots tapping gently against the wooden planks beneath him. He crouched beside the iron giant, examining it with the patience of a man who had spent a lifetime fixing what others overlooked. He did not test the lock, did not wrestle with metal, did not act with the desperation Cyrus expected. Instead, he placed his palm against the steel, feeling its cold heartbeat, listening, as though the safe were a stubborn creature that simply needed to be understood. The crowd whispered. Some mocked. Some leaned in with fascination. And Mara watched him, really watched him, seeing in his stillness the strength Cyrus had never possessed, the quiet intelligence, the unwavering presence, the dignity that refused to bend even when the world pushed hard. Eli stood, walked to his wagon, and returned not with elaborate tools, not with explosives, not with anything a man would use if he wanted to impress a crowd. He returned with a simple ranch tool, a worn metal bar, its edges dulled by years of honest work. Cyrus laughed. The crowd followed, but Eli did not react. He knelt again, sliding the bar beneath the lip of the hinge. Not the lock, never the lock, and with slow, deliberate pressure, began to test the seam. He noticed something, a slight give, too slight for anyone else to see, a flaw in the hinge, where the metal had not been forged evenly. A detail only a man who studied the world with patience would recognize. He adjusted his grip, pressed again, and the safe shuddered, a tremor running through it like a breath caught between fear and surrender. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Laughter faltered, and Cyrus's grin began to crack, revealing the first hints of doubt beneath the polished surface of his pride. Eli paused, rested the tool beside him, and placed his hand once more on the iron door, as if offering it respect, a gesture of understanding. Before finishing what he had begun, the wind stilled, the world held its breath. With a final, steady movement, Eli shifted the hinge, just enough for the safe to groan. A low, echoing sound, like the earth itself opening. But then, he stopped. He rose to his feet, quiet, measured, and turned to face the crowd. His eyes met Cyrus's, not with triumph, not with arrogance, but with a truth that softened the edges of the entire moment. He said, in a voice that carried like a gentle wind across dry grass, that he knew something about the safe, something important, something that would change everything. And with those words, he stepped back, leaving the iron door trembling, half surrendered, half sealed, as the crowd murmured in restless wonder. The narrator's voice dims here, gentle, like a flame leaning low, because the truth has only begun to open, and storms do not break all at once. They gather, they thicken, they breathe, before they finally release the rain they've been carrying for far too long. And on that day, beneath a pale sky and a watching town, the truth waited behind iron doors, ready to step into the light. When Section 4 finally welcomed it, night sinks softly over Rusted Gulch, like an old blanket laid across the bones of a tired land, and the shadows stretch tall across the tycoon's manor, as if the earth itself is bracing for whatever truth must finally rise. Inside that grand house, the one built on pride and polished stone, a safe waits in the far office corner, glinting faintly in the lamplight, as though it already knows whose hands it was destined for. Tom Calder stands before it, broad shoulders squared but breath trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of a lifetime spent being told he wasn't meant to touch dreams like this. And beside him, quiet as a prayer, is the woman who followed the long, slow ache of her own courage. The rancher's daughter with dust-stained hope in her voice, and a heart that had grown used to choosing kindness even when the world did not return it. She steps closer, her presence gentle, like dusk slipping into a warm room, and Tom feels the world settle into something clearer, something true, as if the night has been waiting for this moment to finally exhale. He reaches for the safe's wheel, metal cool against his calloused fingers, and murmurs, almost to himself, almost to her, that soft reminder the tycoon had once given in jest. Open the safe and the gold is yours. He had meant it to mock a poor man, a rancher scraping by, a soul unworthy of wealth. But fate has a way of circling back, slow and intentional, until the jest becomes a prophecy. She lays a hand over Tom's wrist, steadying him, not guiding, just offering a quiet home for his trembling. And that simple touch is enough. The way two rivers meet without force. The The way trust grows not through grand declarations, but through gentle truths shared in the quiet. Tom turns the wheel. One click, two, three. The metal groans, as if resisting the idea that a poor rancher's hands could ever claim such fortune. But the lock gives way. Softly, like surrender, the door swings open. Inside, layered in velvet and arrogance, rests the tycoon's hoard. Stacks of gold that gleam like captured sunlight. Coins that once dictated who held power and who knelt beneath it. But it is not the gold that steals the breath from Tom's chest, nor the heart from hers. It's the envelope, sitting at the front, thin, plain, bearing his father's initials. Etched in handwriting that time has softened but not erased. She steps closer, feeling the air shift, as if the world has paused, waiting, listening, knowing that what lies inside might change the meaning of the entire desert. Tom opens the envelope with the tender fear of someone touching a wound that has never fully healed. Inside, not gold, not deeds, not apologies. A letter, a confession. His father's ink bleeds with the weight of years, telling of how the tycoon stole the ranch's land, rigged the debts, pushed a good man into ruin, and then offered charity dripping with venom. Also, Tom's family would never rise high enough to stand beside him as equals. The truth rings through the room, like a church bell struck in an empty valley, echoing long after the sound has faded. Tom's breath breaks, not in anger, but in something quieter, sadder, the kind of grief that comes when the truth finally arrives, and you realize how long you've walked beneath a burden that was never yours to carry. She steps behind him, arms wrapping around him in a slow, careful embrace, the kind that holds, not to fix, but to witness, to say, "You do not face this alone anymore." Tom closes his eyes, leans back into her warmth, and lets the truth settle, like dust finding its rightful place. Then, footsteps, heavy, echoing down the hall like distant thunder. The tycoon's voice booming aloud. "Where's my little joke of a rancher?" He bursts into the room, cheeks red with drink, eyes wide with shock as he sees the open safe, and then the letter in Tom's hands. The gold means nothing now, and the tycoon knows it, because truth, real truth, is the one thing a powerful man fears most. He grabs for the letter, but Tom steps back, not threatening, not angry, simply standing the way a man stands once he's finally free. She moves to Tom's side, not behind him, but beside him, equal, steady, brave in the way only a quiet soul can be. Tom speaks, his voice rough, low, carrying the storm and the sunrise at once. "You stole my father's life, but you won't steal my future." The tycoon stumbles, reaching for words, for power, for the old habits of intimidation. But none of it works anymore, because fear only controls those who feel alone. And Tom is no longer alone. She steps forward, her gaze unwavering, her voice soft enough to shame thunder. "Your wealth was never gold. It was the power you held over people who believed they were small. Tonight, that ends." The tycoon slumps, something in him collapsing, as if stripped of a throne he thought eternal. And in that silence, the final truth settles like snow on warm earth. The gold was never the treasure. The letter was. The truth was. The freedom was. She was. Tom closes the safe, not taking a single coin, leaving them to gleam in the dark like meaningless trophies. And when he turns, he reaches for her hand, not out of desperation, but certainty. They walk out of the tycoon's manor together, back into the open night, where the stars hang low, as if bowing to two souls who chose truth over wealth, healing over revenge, love over everything else. Outside, the desert wind gathers around them, warm, gentle, carrying the tenderness of stories not yet written. And Tom lifts her hand, presses a kiss to her knuckles. Slow, reverent, a promise spoken without words. "You saw me, when I didn't even see myself." She leans into him, her head against his shoulder, her voice a whisper meant only for quiet nights and brave hearts. "And you," Tom called her, "walked through fire, just to learn that your worth was never measured in gold. He smiles, a rare soft smile that feels like dawn cracking open the long dark. And together they walk toward the ranch, toward a future shaped not by stolen wealth, but by earned peace, earned love, earned truth. And the desert behind them, old and wise, seems to murmur in its ancient voice that the bravest treasure a person can ever claim is the courage to believe they were worthy all along. And if this story touched your heart, if you felt the dust of rusted gulch settle around you, or heard the quiet thunder of two souls finding home, then let your voice join ours. Like, comment, subscribe, and tell me, from what corner of this wide and wandering world are you watching tonight?